Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time talking episode 8 of season 3 of Arrow called The Brave and the Bold. And this is naturally the second part of our crossover event with The Flash. And, well, it's not quite as kinetic as the Flash story, with the whole Oliver and Barry getting into a fight thing. It was still a very enjoyable episode. Lots of really fun character moments. I kind of think of the Flash episode as sort of being the action episode in the story, and then sort of Arrow being more the character one. Now, not that there isn't action in this episode, and not that there wasn't some really fun character stuff over in the Flash episode, but I do kind of feel like that's where the emphasis fell. No, there was very little in these episodes that I can honestly say that failed. But anyway, let's kind of get right into some of the little nods to the comics, and then we'll go and talk about the characters. The first of all, of course, is just the title of the episode, which is The Brave and the Bold, and that's basically sort of the DC team-up book that was published for many years. And it was just kind of a chance to take various heroes from the DC universe, throw them together in an adventure. And a lot of times what they would try and do is come up with the really odd combinations, characters that you really would very rarely see interact with each other. And just kind of have them bounce off each other and have that be half the fun. You'd see things like some of the ones that I remember reading were like Raven from the Teen Titans and Supergirl. Or you'd had Batman and Jay Garrick, the original Flash. There was one issue I read that was pretty crazy. It was actually the Atom had to team up with the Joker. So that made for a really interesting story. Just sort of have a hero who doesn't normally deal with the Joker have to get a real face, just an absolute face full of this horrible, crazy man, and also need his help in order to solve a problem. It was quite an interesting story. They also mentioned that one of the places where they go is a warehouse located on Infantino and Adams, and this is a reference to Carmine Infantino and Neil Adams. Both very famous artists who worked on Flash and Arrow, respectively. Sorry, Green Arrow. And there was that moment where when Clinton Lance meets Barry again, he refers to him, he says like, yeah, your name's what, Bart Allen? Now in the comics, Bart Allen is, long story short, Barry's grandson from the future. You came back to modern times and at first used the name Impulse and later became Kid Flash and then became the Flash and then he died and then he came back again and comic book stuff happened. But yeah, if you can actually go and read the Mark Waid Impulse stories or Jeff Johns when he was writing Teen Titans, those are some good comics. I really, really liked the 90s Impulse comics during Mark Waid's run on them. It was a very, very good series. So anyway, this episode, and I guess I should sort of stop for a moment. When I did my review of Flash yesterday, I actually did forget a few rather important things that I do want to mention. Of course, at the end of the episode, we got to see Ronnie Raymond, played by Robbie Amell, use his powers, and of course, he's destined to become Firestorm. And I even liked how they have had that heat trailing off him, kind of very reminiscent of the visual of Firestorm there. And it's also sort of sounds like he's a little bit crazy, which the whole thing with Firestorm and the Firestorm Matrix can make for some interesting things going on in Firestorm's mind. Of course, if you don't know the comics, that makes no sense at all to you. Rest assured, the show will explain it. I also forgot to mention Oliver running into Sandra. That was the woman who, before he got stuck on the island, he had gotten pregnant, and Moira had paid off and had her tell Oliver that she got an abortion and then move off to Central City. And we see her talking on the phone to a kid. And yeah, basically, if you know the comics, this is almost certainly going to turn out to be Connor Hawke, who was Oliver's son in the comics. Now, I have mentioned that in the comics, the woman who was Oliver's, the mother of Oliver's son, her name wasn't Sandra. Her name was actually Moonday. I think it was sort of mentioned that her parents had been hippies or something. And she was half black, half Asian, which resulted in Connor kind of having somewhat darker skin and blonde hair and a very kind of an unusual looking guy who a lot of artists would sort of forget about and would just draw him looking like a regular white guy, which was always very annoying. So again, I think this is just them taking the opportunity to remind us of the situation, and then setting things up so that Oliver could probably have that come back to haunt him later on this season. So let's see. Let's briefly also talk about the Hong Kong flashback before we dive wholeheartedly into what's happening in the present day. And this episode is just more proof that either Amanda Waller is a sociopath or horrible at her job. So Amanda Waller's thing is, I want Oliver to learn how to torture people for information when it's necessary. So I'm going to point this guy that if Oliver, within a very short amount of time, despite having serious moral qualms about doing this sort of thing, which I am well aware of, and again, never having tortured a man before, I'm going to put him on this, knowing that if he fails, lots of people will die. And then it's sort of like, okay, either Oliver just sort of magically picks up torture, or a lot of people are going to... Amanda had already basically decided, well, we're never going to find these bombs in time, or I don't care if we find these bombs in time. What's really important is me being able to guilt trip Oliver into deciding that torturing people is okay. So, yeah. So either Amanda Waller is a complete idiot for turning an important situation over to somebody who had no idea what they were doing, and who she knew would be extraordinarily reluctant to do what she believed was necessary to resolve the situation, despite the fact that she has people at her command who would do that sort of thing, torture that guy willingly with no hesitation. Or that's the incompetent part, or the sociopath is like, I know I'm just going to let all these people die just so I can screw with Oliver Queen's head and make it easier to get him to do what I want. Again, why in the name of God is Amanda Waller given this sort of power? I mean, we've already talked about, the whole thing of hers being very big on, using a sledgehammer to kill a fly. It's like, oh, there's all these Mirakuru soldiers in Starting City. I have to blow up an entire city of 500,000 people in order to resolve this situation. But this all comes back to what Barry the conversation that Oliver and Barry have at the end, where Oliver's like, having to do these things, every time I do it, I trade away a little piece of myself, a little piece of my soul. And Barry kind of like, you do realize that you're wrong about yourself. It's not really the Arrow that inspires people. It's Oliver Queen that inspires people. I mean, and Barry's right. Oliver has inspired Laurel and Sarah and Roy and Dig and Felicity to become people that they could have never imagined that they could have become. I mean, heck, now it's not entirely true to say, though, that the Arrow hasn't inspired anybody. If anybody, the Arrow has certainly inspired Quentin Lance. Although this just kind of leads back to the question of whether or not Quentin Lance has really figured out that Oliver is the Arrow, which, as I've said before, I think is probably not out of the realm of possibility. But anyway, this is to sort of show, though, that I think it's kind of meant to be another little step in Oliver's journey. I mean, when we see him in Season 1, he's like killing guys left, right, and center. And then Season 2 he realizes, no, this is not how I should be doing things. And since then, the only person he killed was the Count. And that was a situation where it was either he killed the Count or the Count killed Felicity. Now they're bringing up the other main thing that's really morally objectionable about the way that Oliver operates, and that's that he tends to be willing to, as they say, just torture people for information. And you have to wonder, though, if this is kind of going to make him take another look at that choice that he's making. I mean, Batman famously scares the living hell out of criminals to get them to give him information, but he doesn't really torture them. I mean, he might, slap them around a little bit at best, but Batman's not going to inflict serious harm on a person to get information. That's just not how he operates. Usually Batman will just drag them over to the edge of a roof, dangle them off, and say, hey, tell me what I want to know, or I'll drop you. And that usually works. Now, occasionally you run into a criminal who's a little smarter than most, who goes like, "Hey, you're one of the good guys. You're in the Justice League. You hang out with Superman all the time. I know you're not going to drop me." And Batman goes, "Well, yeah, but I'm also kind of crazy. And how do you know that this isn't going to be the time when I just snap? How do you know you're not basically going to be my first victim?" And then that always works because he's Batman. The one thing that really kind of bugs me about this whole situation isn't that Barry isn't objecting to Oliver, stabbing people with arrows in order to get information. It's the fact that Barry is aware that Oliver did the same thing to the storage warehouse manager back in Central City, and he even literally says in this episode that it was last week. So apparently, within the span of a week, Barry totally forgot that Oliver tortured a guy in Central City. And then he comes on the show and acts totally surprised that Oliver tortures a guy. I mean, it really is just kind of ridiculous there. Now, the other big thing this episode is just sort of the contrast. Sort of taking the more lighthearted Central City characters, bringing them onto Starling City. And they even have this really nice conversation. Oliver sort of mocks Barry. It's like, you come from Central City where it's sunny all the time. And, that sort of thing doesn't work here in Starling, where things are rough and gritty and, very 90s-esque in a lot of ways. And even Cisco and Caitlin sort of remark on just how, much meaner Starling City is. And, that just sort of shows the dichotomy. You can really have in superhero universe, you can have those more gritty street level heroes, and then you can have those more fantastic lighthearted heroes and have them still work together. I'm not the first person to notice that the sort of contrast in styles towards being a hero what we see between Oliver and Barry is also very reminiscent of how Superman and Batman are always butting heads. But again, Batman is not a guy who, genuinely hurts people for information. It's mostly just, intimidation. Now, kind of going along those lines, there were a lot of just really hilarious moments of the characters on the show bouncing off each other. Roy's reaction to seeing Barry. Cisco geeking out in the Arrow Cave. I mean, there's just loads and loads of this stuff. Barry, Quentin Lance reacting to having that criminal dropped off in his office by Barry. So, I mean, I could really kind of go on and on about that, but just in the sake of, I have other things to do today, we're just going to kind of cut that short and just sort of focus in more on what's going on character-wise. So that's, I think, kind of wraps it up between Oliver and Barry. Although I'd have to say, I did absolutely love that bit at the end where they go off to that abandoned warehouse or whatever, and they're like, "Okay, let's settle this once and for all for real." And we never do find out exactly who it's gonna be, but that certainly was fun. And they do heavily imply that this is not the last time that we're gonna see them guest starring on each other's show. Which, hey, great. And this also kind of opens the door for perhaps maybe somewhere down the road, like, Canary or the Atom or Wildcat or, whoever, maybe popping over to Central City. I mean, Laurel would be a really great candidate because, remember, her mom also lives in Central City. So it would be very fun to see an episode that would sometime in the future involve, Black Canary and Flash teaming up to take down some bad guy in Central City. But anyway, getting back to Oliver. Now, the other thing that we get with him this episode is we get to see him actually kind of having a conversation with Lila. Now, these two haven't really interacted very much, but I really like that scene simply because, in a lot of ways, both of them being trained Argus agents, for the most part. I mean, I don't know if Oliver was officially on the roster. It's a little unclear. But anyway, they kind of come from a similar place, that tutelage under Amanda Waller and all this other stuff. And they have a conversation where they basically say, sometimes there are people out this world, bad people, who do extreme things, and the only way to stop them is to do extreme things back. And that's not a that's an understandable philosophical point. Now, I'm not going to stand here and pretend that I have all the answers to the the ticking bomb. Do you torture a guy to stop a ticking bomb thing? When people do really extreme things, is it okay to do extreme things back to stop them? I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I have the proper answer to that. But there is basically kind of a saying that kind of goes, and I forget exactly what it is, but basically it's like, when all things are acceptable, when all actions are acceptable, how do you tell the good guys from the bad guys? Is basically the point of it. And that is a perfectly reasonable question. If people who are trying to stop bad guys like Captain Boomerang are willing to do just as extreme things as he is, or I mean, just look at Amanda Waller. She's obviously a believer in that. She's willing to blow up an entire city in order to stop a handful of bad guys. So again, when you're willing to do anything, what exactly is the limit between the line between a good person and a bad person? And isn't it really that a good person will draw the line and say, no, there are things that I will not do? Isn't that really what kind of makes the good person the good person? People have been asking that for a long, long time, and I'm not going to pretend that I have the proper answer to that. But it's something that we always have to be considering because, well, where is the line? There is never an absolute answer to that. We also get to see Dig and Lila decide to get remarried, and I'm cool with that. This sort of would be a good way to sort of bring Lila back into the fold a little bit more, kind of shift the focus, give Dig a reason for more screen time, and also be a great way to kind of get back onto the whole hive situation, which has really kind of been simmering in the background since season 2. We haven't really seen that picked up on. And I also really like that situation in the van where Cisco and Dig kind of have that conversation about superpowers coming into the world, and Dig is like, "What? You think God did this?" And Cisco's like, "No, no, it was like science." But he kind of say that maybe people with powers have shown up in the world because this is a time when we need them to sort of sort things out to help us. And if you're kind of familiar with the history of the DC universe, you know that the start of the superhero age is also one of the big things that sort of kicks off making the Legion of Superheroes future possible. And while there are of course problems in the Legion's future, it's generally portrayed as a very positive place. It's a good future. Yeah, it's kind of like superhero Star Trek future. Yeah, there are problems. Yes, there are bad guys, but for the most part, life is good on Earth. And humans have gone out into the universe and are a positive force in the galaxy. So yeah, let's see. Nothing beyond not that much to say about Cisco. Although the thing of like him considering hitting on Thea, that was pretty hilarious. We also kind of get to see more fun with Felicity and Caitlin. Those two, you can tell those two are probably like talking all the time on like Facebook Messenger or something these days. Oh yeah, I can't forget that Cisco apparently gave Oliver an upgraded suit. So again, I think this is just kind of showing us over time Oliver's outfit is probably going to evolve more and more to look like the more traditional Green Arrow costume. I mean, I don't think he's ever going to run around in the silly little Robin Hood cap, but I do think we're going to still see changes in the costume as time goes by. Let me see what else. Oh yeah, of course we have to talk about the bad guy this episode, Captain Boomerang. Now Captain Boomerang, a longtime Flash villain, member of the Rogues Gallery, very often in olden times portrayed as a ridiculous Australian stereotype who dressed like a breakfast cereal mascot. Now here he's portrayed as a much more, a very, very, as people said, he's very kind of like the more grounded, very much in the Arrow sort of sensibilities. Like they really go and took the effort to really make him a badass. I mean, he's just downing people left and right with those boomerangs, and it is pretty darn awesome. Now, in the comics, it is actually needs to be said that Digger is not Captain Boomerang's real name. His proper name is George Harkness. And I was actually reading this newest Suicide Squad trade that kind of had a little bit of that had him in it. And Captain Boomerang is established as having somebody who has been a member of the Suicide Squad in the past. But it sort of gave a little bit of flashback. You saw him as a kid, and he kind of mentions that his mother was an Aborigine. Now, in the comics, he's always sort of just been portrayed as looking sort of like basically a generic white dude. So that was, I think, a sort of an interesting twist. Not everybody who's of mixed race you can can be immediately picked out as such. Some people, you would really just never guess that they were mixed race just to look at them. Other people, it's obvious. And I guess it's supposed to be that Captain Boomerang is one of those people that you just look at him, you would never guess that he's not 100% Caucasian. But anyway, now this time around, he's actually portrayed by an actor whose name I naturally do not remember, because 90% of the time I forget the actors' names. Who, from what I've read, is actually of Lebanese descent, and I actually do sort of like that this is the choice that they made, because again, just the sort of the idea that you can sort of look at Captain Boomerang and sort of see that maybe that sort of him being of mixed race is a little bit more apparent, or at least plausible. Now, again, a guy of Lebanese ancestry looking like a half white, half Aborigine person, well, okay. I mean, it's not perfect, but it is, I think, perhaps a little bit more realistic slant on what a person from that sort of background might look like. I imagine somebody from Australia might be able to tell me differently. I don't know. But anyway, let's see, what else? Nope, can't think of too much else to say about the characters, and I've been talking for over 20 minutes, so let's kind of start wrapping things up. Now, there were a couple of things that did bother me about this episode, and the most of it comes from that bit at the end. First of all, apparently people in Starling City really frickin' love to take the train to get places. I mean, if Captain Boomerang wanted to get out of town without being spotted, just putting on a baseball cap and, renting a car or stealing a car or something probably would have been a lot easier, and then he could have just driven out of the city on any road that he wanted. But no, apparently he's just going to take the train. I'm going to pretend, just even though that it doesn't look like that, it's a really, really fast train, and that's why people are always taking it between Central City and Starling City. But anyway, so when we see him walking through the train station, you can literally see the boomerangs sticking out of his coat. I mean, how in the name of God is a security guard not going to see that? I mean, a guy walking through a major public transportation hub in the United States with obviously sharp, pointy things hanging out of his coat is gonna get noticed. And then when Flash shows up to deal with it, his thing is to grab all the people in the train, that area, and just take them somewhere else. Probably not too far away, I would imagine. But during that whole confrontation, nobody bothers to actually come back onto the train platform. And this, of course, also brings up the question, why didn't you just grab Captain Boomerang and take him out into a field somewhere and, have he and Oliver kick the guy's ass there? Or just, have Felicity give him some sedative and, come up behind Captain Boomerang at super speed and, jab him in the neck with it. He would be unconscious and there would be no need to fight him. Now, granted, that would have prevented them from finding out about the bombs. Okay, but they didn't know about that. I mean, that's writers at work, basically kind of plot-induced stupidity. And here's the thing, even if Barry hadn't thought of that, Oliver probably would have. So again, that's just dumb. But again, it did make for some cool action stuff. So I suppose we have to be a little forgiving on that. And let's see, anything else? Nope, that about covers it all. So anyway, guys, as I said, really great episode. This crossover was fantastic. Pretty much everything I think we could have ever wanted. I mean, yes, there were a few bumps there, but again, very few hours of television are 100% perfect. But if this is just kind of any indication of the sort of stuff that we can look forward to from these shows in the coming years, then oh my God, this is going to be legendary. This is going to be awesome. So with that said, guys, I'm going to call it here. As always, comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Who's Your Jedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.